Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I'll be taking my first real dive into the Scar L and Scar H and showcasing what I've come up with for builds on these things. The Scar has been a long-awaited addition to Tarkov, and for good reason. It's a pretty iconic and instantly recognizable rifle, it's been well used in the real world, and it's been featured heavily in a lot of great games and movies over the years. In Tarkov terms, the Scar is very much like the MDR rifles, which have been in the game for quite a while. They're both available in 5.56 and 7.62, they both fire at 650 RPM, and they both have pretty limited modding, which means they're quite good right out of the box, but also don't have a ton of customization. The Scar is a little better here compared to the MDR, since you can swap pistol grips, barrels, and do some additions to the handguard. But in general, if you like either of the MDRs, you're probably going to like the Scar. The MDR has quite a bit more ergonomics, but the Scar still generally performs about the same. Personally, I've been really enjoying the Scar L as a very cool but surprisingly affordable setup during the mid-game, and I especially like it for longer range shots because of the default long barrel, which makes it quite accurate. I'll be honest and say that I haven't really been able to put enough time into the Scar H to make a judgment yet, because the only one available to me is the one given as a Christmas gift because I don't have it unlocked and you can't buy it on the flea market, and I used it to mess around with builds in the preset menu. That being said, I think I've got some solid builds cooked up for this thing. With that intro out of the way, let's get started with some builds that I've put together for the Scar L, from a basic budget build up to the higher tiers of trader items. First up for the Scar L, I've got a pretty simple budget build that you can set up using level 2 traders and a bit of the flea market once you have that. You can buy the Scar L on the flea market and it goes for around 60 to 70,000 rubles, about the same price as the 5.56 MDR. The first addition that I make is to replace the default muzzle with the KAC QDC compensator, and then use the flea market to buy the KAC NT4 suppressor, which attaches right onto the muzzle device for a good recoil buff. Next, you can remove the Scar side rails and add the PWS SRX rail extension to the handguard, which gets you a decent ergonomics boost and some rails for adding attachments. For my tactical parts at lower levels, I stick with the RK4 grip and an X400 flashlight, which are both inexpensive and pretty much the best you can get here. After this, you really only need a sight and you can use whatever you prefer, but for this example, I'm using an EOTech Holo from Peacekeeper level 2. Finally, I also add some MBUS sights for the extra ergonomics. With this build, I end up with 62 recoil and about 30 ergonomics for a total cost somewhere around 150,000 rubles, depending on the sight you choose and the flea market prices. Next up for the Scar L, I've got a build using attachments from level 3 traders to improve the stats a bit further. First, for the suppressor, I'm using an amazing new barter trade available at Skier level 3, which lets you get the Thunder Beast Ultra 5 suppressor, which was previously over 100,000 rubles, in exchange for Tagilla's Boss Hat, which now spawns on regular scavs. With this trade, you can usually pick up the suppressor for around 30,000 rubles, which is amazing for any build that can use it. Next, there's another rail extension for the Scar called the Kinetic MREX rail, sold by Skier level 3, which gets you a small recoil buff and some extra ergonomics. You need to remove both sets of rails from the Scar before you add this, and this part needs M-lock rails to add other attachments. For my choice here, I've been using the Magpul RVG foregrip almost exclusively, because at this point, it's basically the best option for the best price, especially now that the Shift foregrip has been nerfed into almost a pointless state. Next up, for the sight, I'm going with a bit more of an expensive setup using the JP 30mm mount to add a Burris TAC 30 scope to the build. You can also fit a Delta Point reflex sight up here for a backup as well if you don't like using the 1x mode for close range fights. For the pistol grip, you can use any AR-15 grip on the Scar, and there's a new part at Skier level 3 called the F1 skeletonized grip that's quite good for the price, so I'm using that here. Finally, again, I just add a pair of MBUS iron sights as well. When this is set up, you got 55 recoil and around 30 ergonomics for a total cost of roughly 200,000 rubles, once again depending on your optic choice and the flea market prices. If you really only care about recoil and you want to get this as low as possible, you're going to want to run the Silencer Co. Saker suppressor and the ASR muzzle device for maximum recoil stats on the muzzle. Then you just replace the foregrip with a Zenit RK1 or RK2, and you end up with the lowest recoil that I was able to get on this thing, which was 50 points, but the ergonomics is really going to hurt. Finally, the last build suggestion that I have is for better ergonomics. Again, I'm replacing the muzzle device, this time going for a mini monster suppressor attached to a Surefire SF3P, which gets you the best possible ergonomics while still being suppressed. Then I switched the grip to the shift foregrip for the extra 1 point of ergonomics, and finally swapped the pistol grip over to the Grawl S from Peacekeeper level 4. This one, you get 66 points of recoil, but you end up with 52 ergonomics, which is almost double the other builds. Now that I've covered the Scar L, we're going to shift gears and look into the Scar H, which uses the 7.62x51 round and hits a lot harder. Just like the MDR, this 7.62 version is limited to only using 20 round mags, and overall it has higher recoil, but puts out much more damage and hits harder at longer distances. Unlike the 5.56 version, the Scar H is currently not able to be purchased on the flea market, which means you're going to basically need to unlock Peacekeeper level 4 and pay around $1,300 US for one of these bad boys, or get lucky and loot it out of a weapon box or off a raider. Mechanic also sells one for about 175,000 rubles as well. First up for these builds, I again have what I would call a pretty good basic starting point for running the Scar H. By the time you get one of these, you basically need to have level 3 traders at the very least, so that's where I'm going to start off. First up, I've got the Thunder Beast suppressor combo, which as a reminder is bartered for one of Tagilla's boss hats at skier level 3. This is one of the best 7.62 suppressors, and for the price, it's an obvious choice on the Scar H. Next, I have the MREX handguard with some rails on it and the same tactical attachments as before. For the sight, I've got the same JP 30mm mount, but this time I opted for the Voodoo scope, which you can get from Jaeger level 3. Since 7.62 is a bit better at longer ranges, it only makes sense to run a bit of a bigger scope. I've also got the Delta Point reflex sight up top too, for close range emergency situations. For the pistol grip, I'm using the F1 skeleton grip that I mentioned earlier because it's a good place to start for a nice ergonomics boost. Finally, once again, there's a pair of MBUS iron sights for the small ergonomics boost as well. With this build, I end up with 81 recoil and about 27 ergonomics for a total cost somewhere around 250,000 rubles. The next one I have set up for the Scar H is just an improvement on the basic build that uses a few parts from other traders to maximize the stats. The first change that I make to this one is the muzzle device, using a new part just added in the 12.12 patch, the KAC muzzle brake kit sold by Mechanic level 3. This muzzle device allows you to attach an older suppressor, the KAC PRS QDC suppressor from Peacekeeper level 3, and when combined, these two items bring the recoil all the way down to 73. The total price isn't too bad either, at around 60,000 rubles for the whole setup. The other change I make is to use the Grawl S pistol grip from Peacekeeper level 4, which gets you some extra ergonomics points. With this build, I get 73 recoil and around 31 ergonomics for a total cost of once again around 275 to 300,000 rubles. If you have the KAC attachments unlocked, I highly recommend trying them on this build or any other 7.62 build. The last thing that I'll point out is that the Scar H can use the Lantac blast mitigation device combo, but with the KAC suppressor now having better recoil than this setup, it seems kinda pointless to me. As a final point of discussion, I'll mention that both of these Scar rifles have 3 different barrels available, much like the SA-58 or the M4. But since they generally come with the longest barrel by default, the only reason that you'd want to swap out barrels is to gain ergonomics. I think the mid-length barrels do have some pretty good stats, and you can make a decent balance between recoil and ergonomics by swapping to the mid-length barrels for either of these rifles. The shortest barrels though are kinda not worth it since you're essentially paying more money to lower the stats of your weapon. I'm sure they can make some cool fun builds for late wipe money sinking, but that's about it. Well, that pretty much covers my first take on builds for the Scar and Escape from Tarkov. They're relatively simple to put together, and honestly the biggest thing that makes any difference is the muzzle device and the foregrip, just like the MDR. The Scar L isn't really a game changer, but I think it's the nicest looking mid-game build available, and the stats are pretty fair for the price. The Scar H on the other hand looks like it's pretty on par with the 7.62 MDR, SR25, and RSAS as a very effective mid to long range rifle with access to powerful ammo. Overall, I think these are great additions to the game, and I look forward to using both of them quite a bit more. I hope this video is helpful to you if you're trying to build one, and let me know what you think of the Scar down in the comments. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone interested, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.